So this gets me to, am I muted? Oh, that's to mute me. I think I want to do user stories next because you had like, while you were talking, I had this great little thought around user stories. I think that's when that, one second.
I like the going into user stories after that. That's good. I also think we should circle back down the road later about agile again, but also this time, like do like discuss the points, like how points should work. Because everywhere I work, all the scrum masters are like it should be this way, but all the managers are like, no, it's this way. And there's that balance
Well,
between.
yeah, that's a good conversation, but it also falls into, oh, by the way, hi everybody. That also, that also goes into the whole, yeah, that's like I've seen several times where it's a scrum master manager sort of like battle of wills there, but it really comes down to it's like whatever you decide. That's like the worst. I know it's the worst possible answer, but it's like what you pick is the right one to do. And don't change it from scrum to scrum. Just pick it, go with it. That's your metric, and then go there. Yeah, I've seen that, and I've like seen all kinds of different ways to do points, and it's just I have my own way I like to do it. But it's all built on sort of my estimates. Even with people I've worked with, developers that are in the same, roughly the same point system. It's fun talking to them because they will point things differently. They will assign values a little differently from how I do it, even within the overall approach that we use. So that's a pretty cool one. That I think agile scrum sprints stuff like that in itself may be a good little one to get into at some point is to just give like do an agile special or maybe a twofer on that.
Yeah, and then with that, follow up with like definition of done and when code goes out, when is code ready? I
Well, it
think
really becomes interesting in the agile approach. Yeah, because what makes deployable useful software at the end of each sprint that you're supposed to do. So yeah. So we're gonna do user stories. Is that good? Okay. Well, hello and welcome back. We are continuing our developer journey and we are going to story time today. We are going to talk about user stories. I'm hoping I've got something that I just came up with. It's an analogy that sticks with you with user stories, but it also follows up well with our prior episode where we were talking about requirements, gathering those, and user stories are a huge portion of that. Before we get into that, my user story is I am one of the founders of Developreneur. It's not really a user story, but hey, go with it. My name is Rob Broadhead. I happen to be one of the founders. I'm also a founder of RB Consulting, where we use simplification, integration, and automation to take all of your code, all your systems, all that stuff that has grown into this big technology sprawl, and we bring it down into a nice little nutshell so that you can use it, maintain it, and scale it. On the other side, who needs no scaling, is Michael. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Michael Malash, and my story is I'm one of the co-founders of Developreneur, and I'm the founder of Envision QA, where we help small to mid-sized companies and healthcare doctors and clinicians build software and automate their systems in a way that makes the job easier, gets the job done, and improves patient care or customer performance.
So, user stories. This is an analogy I just came up with, and so pardon me if it goes off the rails at one point. But I was thinking about this, and I think this is a good layers of the onion approach to getting your user stories and to getting good requirements. Now, user stories in general, the most general way to start, if you've never done one, is who are the users of the system, and then among those users, it's what are they doing? How do they use the system? What is the story? So if let's say it's a system that's a back office system that the office manager uses on a daily basis, they're going to have multiple stories because they may go in there to enter a customer information, to look up a customer, to provide support, to go enter bills that have come in, to enter payments that have come in, to look up somebody in the HR system because they need to call them. All of these are user stories. That it is the path that you're going on to achieve a goal within that system. Now, what we've talked before, there's this thing called the happy path. which is basically I'm going to go from point A to point B. I'm going to get on the system. I have this problem I want to solve or this task I want to complete. And these are the steps to get it done. Now, here's my analogy. Let's think about that. That's your G-rated movie right there. That is like everything goes right. That is the happy path. Everything's good. The data is correct. The data is clean. The data is consistent. The system works the way it's supposed to. And the answer you get is exactly the answer you get. Now, ideally, most of the time, that's what happens. I don't know if that's true. Just like in the movie world, there's not a lot of G-rated movies. Your next step is your PG. There's a lot more of those. That's more common. And this is where we've built the happy path now. We've talked about that with our user and said, okay, well, if everything goes right, what does it look like? Now we start looking a little bit at it. We start picking at it a little bit. It's like, well, okay, what if it may be things like, what if this data is outside of a normal range? Or what if there is a typo? What if this phone number, they put an A in there instead of numbers? Things like, what are these things that can go wrong? And then how do we handle them? Do we let the user know? Do we just push it through the system? What do we do? And this is getting them thinking through, as you're building the user story and as your customer, you're working with them, what are the essentially sort of the exceptions or what are the messages? And some of this is even within the happy path because it's things like, okay, you get all the way to the end. Does anybody need to know it? Do you need to send an email? Do you need to pop a little "you were successful" message? Things like that. And so PG is where we go into that next step is we start picking at the happy path a little bit and we're adding to it and saying, okay, this assume everybody is on the same page and everything's awesome. Well, but now we're not. So do we have to notify people? Do we have some side effects and things like that? And then you start moving into now like the R-rated stuff, which is where things are not good. And this is where people have, like, for example, what happens if you're entering a user's name and you misspell the name? We don't know that you've misspelled the name necessarily, but what happens there? Do you do validation checks? If they're entering a city and a state and a zip code, what happens if they put the incorrect zip code? What if they try to put a 3-digit number in there? For US, it's going to be at least a 5-digit zip code. What is it if they don't put a value in? Are there things that are required? Are there things that aren't required? Are there things that are in the requirements that must connect to other things? For example, if you have a zip code and you have a state and that zip code doesn't exist in that state, do we need to verify that? Do we need to stop that from moving forward? If you're doing like a bank account transaction, what happens if you try to withdraw money and they don't have funds in the account? What happens if somebody's going through and entering data and they just put, AAA, BBBB, CCC? What is that? What if they enter an email address that is like a@b.com or something like that? This is where you're getting into the stuff where it's like, what about these situations where somebody is just inept or is trying to just like fly through the system and just get stuff slammed in as opposed to doing it the right way, or maybe even intentionally, which is where we get into like the rated X stuff. They're intentionally trying to crash or screw with the system. So this is where you talk about like SQL injection and things like that. It's like, what happens if somebody tries to shove something in here that's effectively code that the system decides it's going to try to execute? So you can go from the happy path and sunshine and rainbows to rated X Jason versus Michael Myers thing and all those kinds of stuff. I mean, it's like you can go into the horror movie side of it. When you're going through those, that's when you're going to get really full featured user stories. Yes, I did get back to my original point. That's where you get your really full featured user stories because you're peeling that onion off. You're saying, okay, this is good. And then what? What if this happens? What about this? What if this isn't right? And as you start picking out what every step is, what every data item is, as you're examining each of those and what can go wrong effectively, now you are fleshing out a true story. It's not just some little, paragraph of this is what it is. Now you've got like full plot and character development in your user story. And that is where you're going to have super detailed, super valuable requirements. And now I'm going to take a breath and see what you thought about that one.
Yeah, I really liked your approach to that. I would like to add a couple things to it, though. So I like how you kind of walk through the different analogies of movies and ratings with different stories and different levels of chaos that potentially comes from trying to define these stories. However, in addition to that, some of the things that come to my mind are, so you have the story, like you're writing these stories, but as developers, I've seen this more often than not. Instead of listening for the story, they start injecting code or methodologies into the stories, which don't need to be there. It's like the person needs an accounting software system or a payroll system. Cool. They don't care that it's written in C, Java. They don't care if there's a database behind it. They just want a payroll system, an accounting system. So stories don't necessarily translate to tech. The story is what we are saying. It is a story. This is what I want. This is the journey from point A to point B. You're going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. How do I get there? Tell me about it. Tell me how the system is going to work. Tell me how you want this feature to be implemented. And you go through that process. You're going to have to, for lack of a better term, shut up, put on your hearing aids, crank them up, and listen to the customer. And from developers, when we're busy, that can be hard. We can fall into that crutch where, yeah, I heard you say that, but in reality, I didn't fully hear the story. I heard parts of the feature, and only parts of the feature get implemented. So you have to be very careful that the story that you are being told or the story that you are gathering, that you get the details of the story for the full feature. You may not get everything. So the other thing to think about too, in addition to that, is there's different levels of stories, not necessarily ratings, but levels. You have your feature complete story, which is what I need to just get a working system that complies with the basic of this story. Okay, I need a payroll system. I want to get paid. So I need a system that will pay me. Cool. That is the baseline story. Now, I start hiring people. Oops, my current system that's in a new feature, a new story to be added on to an existing application. All right. Now we have to add some additional requirements. Okay. Now I have multiple people who's are, do I have to worry about managing? What type of security constraints do I have? Who can see what? I don't want people seeing my payroll information. So these are stories that have to be flushed out. And then you get into bigger systems where you hand this off to, okay, so now I want to sell this system to someone else. Well, now there's other features. So you have at the beginning what you need, the basic story to build the application, the happy path, the must have features of your application. Then you have the nice to have features or new features that get implemented later. These stories are additions to the main story. These could be spin-offs. These could be, book 2, book 3, book 4, which would be version 2, 3, and 4 of your software. Or they could essentially be integration pieces that just kind of tie in to your story. So there are different layers and different levels to story writing, listening to the stories, and then writing the applications or asking all those what if questions to define the story the right way. Rob, thoughts?
That really adds to the, yeah. Wow, my analogy was awesome because now I'm thinking about it as like that's one of the other things is, are you building a documentary where you're just like Michael said, where it's just about the features? Or is this a summer blockbuster where you're not just building features, but you are putting a wow factor in it that's going to like draw people in regardless? I mean, there's the feature, but as well on top of the feature, because that's sometimes what you're going to get. It's not, it's people are saying, hey, I don't want just I don't want something where this is going to come and they're going to be able to select a product from my store. I want them to want to sit on my store and play around with selecting products because that's how awesome the environment is. There is also, as he said, there's like, you think almost like there are levels and there are different, we'll even say genres of stories. And user stories are the same way. And this is where you get into reading between the lines a little bit. And what, as Michael mentioned, is like really listening to the story as it is, not solving it while they're doing it, but letting them talk through that story because you're going to want to get that stuff like, wait a minute, you mentioned this feature. It seems like you need more than just that feature. Maybe you need to like, it's maybe it's something as simple as like, you mentioned entering this data, this piece of data, but what if it sounds like it's hard to get that data? So do we need to also have as a feature a way to look that up or to validate that or something like that, or a way to go jump and view that and shop? It would be like in a shopping cart. You can add products, but if you only know SKUs, your shopping experience is going to be very difficult. What you want is a catalog behind that, shopping cart and things like that. And it's things like, okay, in the checkout process, how does that look? And there's so many things around the user stories that I think the more you realize they are stories and not just bullet point items necessarily, the more you're going to be able to ask the right questions. And this is where you can really help your customer take it to the next level, because instead of just regurgitating what they give you, you can help talk them through and think through some of these processes and say, okay, this is what you've got. This is where you want to go. How can we make adjustments to that journey? How can we make it easier? How can we make it faster? Is there maybe something that would mean we won't even need to take that journey? Because sometimes you do that as you get into stories. You're like, wait a minute, that story we talked about last week is exactly the story we're talking about this week, except for it's only a different user. So is that really just the same user story and two people can access it? There's things like that. I don't want to run too long because I got places to go and things to do. Even though you may think that's just virtually and we just live here all the time, we do have lives outside of outside of this little box here that we're in, or your ear holes if you're listening to us. Basically, we are not just mindless or bodiless voices out there, phantasms that are just talking. So, anyways, I digress more than a little bit. As always, reach out and just any information that you have, feedback, suggestions, comments, love it all. We do this partially for us, partially for you, more so for you than us. So we'd love to do topics, questions in areas that are concerns for you as you are becoming better developers. Maybe there's some ways that we can sit down and talk through some of the things that are stymieing you, or just challenges, or your own pain points, or your own stories, user stories that we can help you with to work through and get you to that point where you are a better developer. And sometimes it just takes a couple of different people, a couple of different perspectives to get us over that hump. Shoot us an email at info@developreneur.com. Check us out at developreneur.com. We've got a contact form. We're out on Twitter X, formerly Twitter, at Developreneur. You can check us out there. Follow us. You can see us wherever you get podcasts. We're there. YouTube, out on the Developreneur channel. And there's other stuff around that. It's not just the podcast, but we also have a lot of other content, tutorials, things of that nature. And then there's school.developreneur.com, where, funny enough, we have tutorials and classes and things that you can learn as well. We just spew all this content out there trying to help you guys out. And actually, it helps us out as well. It's amazing how often we go to search something and we end up going back to our page to be like where we wrote the steps to knock that out 10 years ago, and we haven't had to use it since. Don't wait 10 years before you come back here, though. Go out there and have yourself a great day, great week, and we will talk to you next time. Bonus material.
So I kept it out of the audio, but once you have defined your stories, don't just go write the code. You can break down the stories into smaller chunks. And then, because again, this could be a feature story, this could be a full featured story where you have to build everything from scratch. But typically, what you can do is you can take those stories down, you break it down into the individual components, and then these essentially will become at the end of the movie. Did I check all these boxes? This is going to be your checklist. These will become your unit tests, your integration tests, your user acceptance criteria. Hell, it may even be your regression or smoke testing. But your story is where you get all the checkpoints you need. So at the beginning of the story, by the end, did I touch all the touch points of the story? If I didn't, then what did I miss? I did not tell a complete story. So I need to go back and figure out what I need to plug back in to get the full story.
Yeah, that is truly the stories are your requirements. These are the things that you have to address. They are not, as we talked about a little bit there, they're not your design. There's not necessarily, probably shouldn't be anywhere in the stories references to programming languages or really even databases and things like that. Now, you may store data and stuff like that. Just say, hey, the system stores X, but whatever that is, it may be in a database. It may be out in the cloud somewhere. It could be in a relational database. It could be in a NoSQL database. It could be on a flat file. There's so many ways those things can be done. That gets in the design side of it. You don't want to clutter your stories with the implementation, with the technology. You want to leave that open as long as possible. And then the design is where you start picking apart those stories and you start figuring out how you're going to put those pieces together. And then, of course, as you flow through there's going to be, you should see all of the items that were addressed in the stories should be addressed by your design, should be addressed in implementation. And then those lead, make it really easy for the testers. And then they just easily write a little test script that walks through those items and checks to make sure they exist. That I think will do it because I got to run. I got one of these fun customers and I got crap to do. So, hey, we're busy people. We got bills to pay. That being said, as always, we'd love to get any feedback that you have. Leave us comments. Check us out twice a week. We're going to drop these out. Check out the Developreneur site. We do sometimes throw additional blog articles and other stuff out there as well. I don't think we have done as much now, but as usually we get a little seasonal. We'll get times a year that things settle down for us and we can knock out more of that kind of information, get that stuff out there. And of course, we do requests. So if there's anything that you have that you would like us to talk about, maybe a tutorial you'd like us to do, a technology you'd like us to review, any of that kind of stuff, more than happy to do so. Again, info@developreneur.com. That's DEVELPRENEUR.com. It's also all over the place here. Since you're watching, you can see the Developreneur thing all over the place. Use that. Leave us comments however you want to get to it. That being said, we're going to wrap this one up. Let you guys get to it. Have yourself a great night, great evening, great week, and we will talk to you next time.